Hi there, my name's Craig, DeLonghi's Coffee Ambassador. And this is Cheryl.
Yes, I am the National Trainer for DeLonghi, and we are here to talk to you about coffee. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for purchasing a DeLonghi machine.
We'd love to have you here today to show you and share with you our tips and secrets about how to use these wonderful machines that we've got here and the ones that you have in your home, and to tell you a little bit about coffee in hoping that we can share with you our passion and enjoyment of what makes this such a great beverage.
Absolutely, and don't worry if you don't see your specific model machine here. Today we're using the fully automatic Prima Donna Sol and the manual Prestigio machine from the La Specialista range. But this is live, guys. We've come in especially to the studio today just to be here for you. So ask us questions about your machine and we will make it relevant by showing you it on our machines today.
So the email will be up there on the screen?
Yes, exactly.
It's, tell me what it is again.
events.au@delonghigroup.com. So we're monitoring that email today. And even if we don't get time to answer your question during today's live show or class, we will answer it via the email anyway. So please, there's no stupid questions. We both have a lot of coffee experience and I'm very excited to talk to you about coffee and espresso. So please ask us anything related to coffee or machines.
Okay, so today I'm going to tell you where coffee comes from. Share with you how that can influence the flavor differences within coffee, because we really want to help you find coffee that you like. To make a great beverage, you have to enjoy the raw materials. So to help demystify some of what creates those flavors, that's what I'm going to talk about. And then Cheryl's going to talk to you about how to use these wonderful machines, some tips and tricks on the techniques and the basics that you need to have under control to dial in that coffee to make that great, awesome cup of coffee every day. And then we're going to come back and answer those questions together. So we hope you enjoy the process. I'm going to start off by telling you where coffee comes from. And
I'm going to get out of here for a moment.
Cheryl's going to be back in a minute.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so I've been involved in coffee for quite some time now, around about 20 years. And I started working with DeLonghi around about 4 years ago as a coffee ambassador specialist for them to assist in their product design and to help share the joys of coffee with you, the wonderful people who are buying their machines to use at home. Let me take you on that step where coffee comes from that tree all the way through processing and roasting to your cup of coffee and when you make that, grind those coffee beans in your machines. I've been around for a while and I've been fairly successful in exploring coffee. So just to establish my credentials, there you can see some of the awards that I've won along the way. And all of that has led to being able to explore coffee in a lot of detail, to really understand what creates flavor. So hopefully some of that I can share with you today. The coffee comes from a tree. It's the Rubiaceae family. The genus is Coffea, and there are quite a few species. Up until now, you probably have only tried Arabica and Robusta. They're the two main species that we've used commercially. However, due to some of the challenges of climate change, Liberica and Eugenioides have also been started to be explored, and I think you'll probably find that you will see those start to become available. These are coffees that have a lot more tolerance to heat and temperature and pests. So along the way, we're going to see some changes. Some of it good, some of it hopefully we'll be able to carry along with us so that we don't miss out on those wonderful Arabica and Robusta coffees that we already are experiencing. It's a shrub, it's evergreen. It will grow up to around about 10 meters. However, because it's primarily picked by people, they're normally pruned down to 2 meters. Coffee grows between the two tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and that's because it needs a couple of specific climatic conditions to be really successful to grow into tasty coffee. And what that is that it needs a relatively hot and humid temperature during the day, and it needs a relatively cool temperature at night. It also needs very distinct rainfall patterns. You need a distinct dry season for maturation and processing, and you need a distinct wet season so that the tree gets enough water and nutrients and also is able to flower. And that flowering process is the beginning of creating cherries that we take the seeds from when we roast to make our coffees. If that wet and dry season is unpredictable, when we have the flowers flowering, then the water can wash those flowers off the tree and the cherries won't even establish to make those coffees. Also, if it's during the maturation phase and we have too much water, those cherries plump up by taking on all that water and the skin can split or they can fall off the tree before we get to maturation. So that band in between those two tropics is where we see lots of volcanic action within countries over the past, and that's created lots of high mountains in very warm climates. So that is normally the best tasting coffee grows there. We're starting to see a little bit of it creep outside. I've heard of coffee being successfully grown in Southern California now, and some of that is due to climatic change. But for now, most of those coffees you will find coming from there. And every country that they grow in will have unique climatic conditions, which is why coffee tastes different when it comes from different countries. Well, one of the reasons, I should say. In case you didn't know, coffee comes from a fruit. So the coffee tree produces a fruit, and you can see one up the top corner of that screen there, cut in half, and it grows 2 seeds, and it's the seeds that we dry and roast so that we can make coffee from them. You can see there that those 2 seeds have grown. Sometimes those seeds grow as a single, they don't actually split apart, and sometimes they grow as 3. All of those mutations lead to different tasting coffees. However, sometimes they don't actually even form properly. And these are the poorly formed seeds that we don't actually want in our great coffee, that we try and make sure don't make it to your bag of coffee when we make specialty coffee. And let me talk you through some of those things that we do along the way to make sure you get the best tasting coffee within your bag of coffee that you buy. But let's start with the trees. Coffee trees take between 3 to 5 years to mature enough to produce a commercially viable crop for each tree. So what the farmers will normally do is that they will take their seeds from the previous year, or they'll find new varietals from seed stock that is kept within different coffee organizations in the countries, and they will choose ideally varietals that suit the climate that their farm is at, the elevations, the amount of rainfall and the temperatures. Because there is an enormous amount of variation, mutation within the coffee varietals over the hundreds of years that we've known about coffee, they all make their own unique flavors, but they don't all grow as well in different countries, different elevations. So these farmers will often experiment to try and find better varietals that produce high quality tasting coffee, but also are tolerant of the places they exist. They will normally house them in a nursery for the first year. You can see on the right there, they're under shade. They're fairly delicate in that first year before they then go out to the fields and plant their crops. As the tree is maturing, by the time it gets to that 5th year, you'll see there the process of flowering through to ripe cherries. So we have those white flowers. They smell really fragrant if you get a chance to go through a coffee farm at the blossoming stage, somewhere between honeysuckle and jasmine, something like that. And then they are pollinated by bees, obviously, and that forms those cherries. So you can see in the middle, they're green cherries. They're cherries that are in the process of maturation. And as I was saying before, the elevation and the temperature really influences how those trees mature. If you're low down the mountain at a low elevation, you have lots of sun and lots of temperature all the time, they ripen very quickly and they don't have enough time to form complex organic acids and compounds that equal complex and tasty coffees. However, further up the mountain with the cooler nighttime temperatures, it slows down that maturation cycle. It slows down the respiration cycle of the plant. So they ripen during the day, the plant slows down at night, and all of that complexity is able to develop. It is why when you find coffees that are grown at higher elevations and altitudes, which you'll often see shown on the bag, they're normally more complex and interesting coffees. On the right there, you can see that those cherries are in the process of ripening. They go that rich burgundy red color, but you can still see a couple of green ones and some variation in the color. In that picture, there's a farmer friend of mine who has a farm in Guatemala, and his name's Rolando, and he's pointing out to me those different colors and what he's trying to ask his pickers to pick so that that coffee tastes its best. And you can see there that lighter color cherry in his hand still has the stalk attached to it. It's not quite ripe enough yet, even though it looks red, all the way through to an even darker black cherry type of color that has developed a lot more sugars within the cherry, which transfers to the flavor within that coffee seed. He came up with a really ingenious idea of getting nail polish that is the color of the cherries he wanted his pickers to pick. And men and women pickers both alike painted their thumbnails so that when they went to pick those cherries, they could match the color on their thumbnails to those cherries and only pick the ripest coffees. It obviously means that they need to go through the farms a lot more times to be able to pick just the correct ripeness, because those cherries don't mature all at the same time. And obviously the longer it takes and the more times you have to go through the trees to pick, it's going to increase both the cost but also the risk to the farmer. Obviously any undesirable weather conditions, lots of rain or high winds, risks knocking those cherries off the tree and they lose their crop. So the process of picking ripe cherries at that perfect point is also adding to that risk. And I think it's important to recognize just how much risk is involved for these farmers to create great coffee, which is why they're often priced more expensive. So when you sit there and you see really cheap coffee and quite expensive coffee, it isn't just someone cynically asking for more money trying to trick you. Most of the times you'll see coffees that cost more take a lot more labor and cost to produce. And that obviously is what we see. There are three ways that coffee is normally picked. Mechanical, that's where trucks with big plastic flap things that spin around knock all of the cherries off. You primarily will see that in Brazil where the land is a lot flatter and they're able to actually utilize tractors. On most farms through Central America, it's somewhere between a 30 to a 60 degree slope on the mountainside. You couldn't even use mechanical picking. I'm sure you can understand that if you use mechanical picking, you're just going to take whatever ripeness those cherries are on the tree indiscriminately. So mechanical picked coffees are rarely the highest quality of coffee. The human equivalent of that is strip picking, where you run your fingers down that branch of coffee cherries and they all come off at once. Once again, unlikely to give you the highest quality of cherries. And then the last option, highest, most ripe cherries, is selective picking, like I mentioned, going through the farm and just picking those ripe cherries. Almost all specialty coffee is selected that way. There are a few options if you do strip pick or mechanically pick that will allow you to at least separate out those high quality ripe cherries, but it will leave you with a lot more percentage of unripe or less flavoursome, lower quality coffees for the farm to have to dry and sell. And obviously lower quality cherries equals lesser price for the farmer. So it's always ideal for them to be able to produce as much specialty coffee as possible. Up until very recently, most farms only produce 5 to 10% of specialty coffee out of all of their yearly crop. So all coffee has a home. We don't necessarily just have to buy very expensive coffees. However, it is worth recognizing how much value they do add back to the farmers. Once that coffee cherry is taken off the tree, that is the last point that it has the maximum potential of flavor. From that point onwards, all of the steps either realize that potential or diminishing it. So the first thing we have to do after picking it is dry the coffee cherries. Dry the seeds, I should say, within the cherries or outside of the cherries. There are three main processing methods that are used. That is natural, washed, and semi-washed or pulp natural, as it's sometimes called, or honey even, you might have seen. Natural coffees are the easiest to dry in the sense that you take them off the tree as a cherry and you dry those cherries whole with the seeds inside. However, they do pose a risk of molding if you try and dry natural processed coffees in climates that are too humid or cool or have rain. A lot of high mountainous Central American countries often have too much humidity and too low temperatures, and it is a high risk to the farmer to try natural processed coffees. You'll mostly see natural processed coffees from Africa where it is dry and hot because that suits that process. It takes around about 15 to 30 days for a naturally processed coffee to dry down to the 10 to 12% moisture that coffee needs to be safe to transport. Any molding obviously leads to often undesirable flavors. So for the countries that didn't have hot, dry climates during the drying season, they tried to work out other ways. Luckily, lots of humidity normally means lots of rain, which normally means lots of water. And the washed process was worked out as a desirable way to minimize or at least mitigate against the likelihood of spoiling through mold or taking too long to dry and over fermentation. To achieve that processing method, what you need to do is you take those cherries and you squeeze them out of the skin and you ferment the flesh of the fruit off the seeds and then you dry it. By taking it out of the skin, by taking that flesh off the seed, you increase the speed of drying down to around about 8 days, so a lot less risk of molding and spoiling. There's one step in the middle where you can take it out of the skin and then dry it as it is without that fermentation phase, and that's the semi-washed pulp natural or honey phase. All of these processing methods, drying methods, equal different flavors, and that's another layer of what changes the flavor. So far we've got the varietal of tree it is, influences the flavor. We've got the country it grows in, influences the flavor because of climate and soil and elevation. And then we now have the processing method influences flavor as well. And it keeps going. But before we do that, let me talk about some of the quality steps that you might want to achieve. So here, this was a farm in Guatemala that I picked some coffees. You can see that those cherries are yellow. That's actually a yellow Bourbon varietal, so they never go red. It took quite a while for farmers to find that out. They thought they were just accidentally picking underripe cherries. And here we're putting them into a water tank. And what this does is it floats the cherries. The lower quality cherries have less density. They float to the surface. These are removed, and the heavier density cherries that sink to the bottom continue on the process to make great coffee. If you turn it into a pulp natural or a washed coffee, you need to depulp the coffee. And here is a little depulping machine that I used in Panama with some coffee that I made. And you can see those seeds being squashed out of the red cherries. Some of the skin does end up in that bucket, as you can see there, but you can see fundamentally that those seeds are coming out. I created a washed process here, so what we did is then we fermented the flesh off those seeds in that black plastic tub that you can see, but that's the process of depulping. Lastly, I'm going to show you a fully mechanized system that was designed in Brazil. If you remember earlier, I spoke to you about how they do have mechanical ways of taking coffee cherries off the tree, and as a way of being able to take those cherries and still make higher quality coffee, they worked on all of these mechanized machines that help them achieve that. So you can see here, it's going over that large screen, which allows just the cherries to fall through. That removes rocks and sticks and leaves and things like that, which are undesirable. You can see there that that water floating tank is mechanized, so the lesser density cherries stay on top and the heavier cherries are down the bottom, so they can separate those out. You can see that going into those two channels there. The ones on the left don't look that great, right? And then you can see it going through a pulping machine. So that's the drum spinning around, and it sends those cherries through and it squishes the seeds out. And then lastly, you'll see them falling out into buckets. So we have the high quality seeds out of one channel and the lower quality seeds out of another channel. So by separating them out, they're able to make higher quality coffee without all of the variation that you achieve. So you can see that they've done a pretty good job of actually minimizing the lower quality seeds there. And lastly, it's going up into those stainless steel tanks to ferment. Obviously, that is a lot cleaner process because they can clean those stainless steel tanks. The cleaner you keep it, the better the coffee is going to taste. It then needs to dry, so it goes from that depulping or washing station. It ends up on either raised beds or out on concrete tiles or sometimes even mechanically dried. On the left there is the raised bed, so I have that coffee in a single layer. Because it's raised on a mesh, it allows the air to access to all of the seeds top and bottom. It dries a lot faster, less likelihood of molding and spoiling or over fermentation. In the middle there you can see the patio, so that's on the concrete patio. They obviously warm up with the sun, so that helps. And they've got those layers of cherries. So down the middle, the red cherries is a natural processed coffee. On that next band of coffees that you can see with the gentlemen that are raking, that's a washed coffee. It's really pale colored. And then you can see next to it is a halfway color. That was a honey process or a pulp natural process. So they were doing all of the drying methods on that particular farm to get lots of different flavors. And those gentlemen have to turn that coffee and make those channels every hour. They turn those, and they keep changing the direction so that it's turning them to remove the moisture and make sure there's not those wet seeds at the bottom of the pile and the drying seeds on the top. On the right, you can see a mechanical dryer. So a lot of farms, if they have the capacity, put a mechanical dryer in. Once again, it improves consistency of drying. It doesn't necessarily make the coffee better, though, in my experience from a taste perspective. So it reduces risk, but it potentially also lowers the quality of the coffee. All of these are choices that the wet mill or the farmer are making to determine what those coffees are going to taste like. Before it gets shipped, it has to go through a dry mill. So the coffee goes through another phase of quality control. There you can see the coffee going through another screen size. So they're separating out the different seed sizes. It's going through the dehuller. There's a small husky shell that sits on that coffee seed. That's the last layer of protection. You have to remove that. And then lastly, it's on an Oliver table or a density table. And what that is a table with lots of ridges that sits on an angle and it vibrates side to side. The heavier, more dense seeds are pulled up the table by those ridges, and the lighter, lower density seeds are down the bottom of the table. And as the purchaser, you can ask them to run it multiple times across that density table, or set where those dividers are to determine the density of your seeds, to determine the quality. Obviously, every single step that you do adds a process, adds a cost, makes the coffee more expensive. Once again, why the higher quality coffees do cost more. Lastly, it gets put into bags. You can fit around about 18,000 kilos in a container. It goes on a ship and it ends up at me as a roaster if I've purchased that coffee, or your local specialty coffee roaster. And I would encourage everyone to go out and support your local specialty coffee roaster. It'll be roasted fresh. They are choosing the highest quality coffees, and they're making sure they get them to you quite close after they've roasted them so that you have the best chance of making a great coffee. That's where coffee comes from. Hopefully that's given you an understanding and awareness and appreciation of the amount of work that goes into making great coffee and why there is so much variation in flavor. And I encourage you to find your favorite roaster and your favorite origin or processing method or style of coffee so that you can make a great coffee. Because if you don't put raw materials in that you like the flavor of, no matter how good you try to make that coffee using these fantastic machines, you're unlikely to get something that tastes like you will like. So I'm going to leave you there for a moment. I'm going to bring Cheryl back on, and she's going to show you the steps to make great coffee out of those roasted beans that you've bought. So thanks for giving me some of your time and listening to that. I'll see you back in a minute.
Thank you so much, Craig. Great tips. And I am certainly one for choosing a few of my favorite roasters and rotating the different coffees as I go along. So let's get into making perfect espresso. Now, why am I talking to espresso? Not because that's the only coffee I drink, because I drink long black, flat white, whatever. But once we get espresso right, this is actually the basis for all of our other drinks. So whether it's flat white, latte, cappuccino, we're using the espresso shot as the basis. So particularly on your manual machines, this is what you want to test and get right first. And then on the automatic machines, I'm going to show you a few tricks inside the recipes to make sure that once you've set espresso, your settings are also correct for the milk drinks as well. So don't forget to ask questions as I go along as well. We will be answering those in a second, and there's the email on the screen for you to have send the questions to. So here's my top tips. Number one, we're going to make some changes, but we don't want to make all of our changes at once, and we don't want to change everything. So let's start with the manual machine first. As I said, this is the Specialista Prestigio. Now, I'm going to set the dose first on this one because this is the most important part when you're using one of the manual machines with the tamp station. And in fact, even if you had an Arte and you were doing the manual dosing, you would also set the dose first. So the cool thing, oh, and this is a filthy filter basket, so I'm just going to give it a little clean. It's very important not to use a dirty basket. So inside the filter basket, there's a little ridge that you'll see on the close-up here. And this ridge here is our dosing ridge. So if you don't have scales and you don't want to measure, you just want to do it the easy way, just make sure that when the coffee's tamped, it's going to that ridge. So pop it in. This is number one, we're setting the dose, okay? So we're actually gonna grind and tamp, and then we're just gonna have a look and see where the coffee actually sits. So who knows, we could be super lucky and actually be set to the perfect dose, which I am. So I'll still talk through what we'll do. But what you can see now is that if I actually go to this side, you'll see it even better. That line is exactly lined up with the coffee. So if it wasn't like this, I'm going to take the dose up or down. Now, biggest tip for adjusting the dose of the manual machines is do not do big movements. Just do about 1 millimeter of movement. So if this was too low, I'm going to take it up towards the right, and I'm just going to move it 1 millimeter. If this was too high, I could take it back a little bit. So you sort of think of it like a clock. So I've actually got mine set to 12 o'clock, and it's working beautifully for this coffee. Now, different coffee beans will grind in different ways and more or less will come out. And that's got a lot to do with what Craig was just talking about with all those different beans in there as well. Okay, so we've got the perfect dose. So now what we want to do is assess the grind that we've got. So we actually need to make a coffee. Now this is a good opportunity to watch and see if you've got that perfect crema. You want golden brown colors, but you also want to make sure it's the right time. So I'm going to grind another shot. We'll let it dose, we'll tamp it. So cleanliness is key for this as well, because if you do have a dirty basket and you're going to taste that coffee, it's going to taste bitter, burnt. So you don't want to have bitter, burnt flavors because you're using a dirty machine. So I'm going to pop it in and I'm actually going to make a shot of coffee. So this is set to by 2 because I'm using the double basket, but I'm just going to make like a super strong shot. I've got it on espresso on the right here, and then I'm going to press OK, and I'll just stop it. So this is just kind of like making a double espresso into 1 cup. It's still fine for assessment because I'm still going to see if it's pouring correctly. I just know that it's a double shot for drinking it, really. Like that would be pretty strong, although I do like double espresso. So this is looking pretty fast. We can see that there's not much of a crema. It's looking really watery. I'm just going to lift it up out of shot into a different shot. Look at that. See, camera guys are following me well today. And you can see that the crema's already started to disappear. It's looking very flat. Now, I actually know why this has happened, and it's not because of my grind. So this is what I mean. Be careful about what you're changing, how quickly you're changing it, and how many changes you're making. So this is not a grind. I'm actually already on grind 3, which I know is good for this coffee. But what's happened here is the beans that are in this hopper are from the other day and they've gone stale. So you very much want to make sure that you don't, sorry, turning my back to the camera, I'm doing everything wrong today. This is the great thing about having the live class. You get to see all of the real stuff. But if your beans are not fresh, you're going to have beans that are stale. they will not have flavour and they will not pour correctly. So what I need to do, because I have put fresh beans in here, but just the few beans that are left in the collar from before are not fresh. So I'm just going to grind them through, and then I'm going to prove to you that what I say is, because we'll make another shot and it'll look a lot better than that one. So in this instance, I am going to get rid of coffee, but you should never need to waste coffee this much, because there's actually a few things that we'll answer later to help you store your beans correctly, or to actually purchase fresher beans so that you cannot have this problem. So in this instance, it wasn't the grind. Now, the one thing I do want to talk to, if you do need to change the grind, is that you want to make sure that you think of rocks and sand. So if you're one of those people that struggle to think, do I need to go to a smaller number, like number 2 or number 1, or do I need to go to a bigger number? Think of rocks and sand. So when we go to the beach and we see waves crashing over the sand is quite fine, and we see the water taking a long time to go through the sand. That's fine coffee. So that's a lower number on your grinder. And this relates to the fully auto as well. If you have rocks, like we're going on a hike, and we've gotten to the waterfall and the water is crashing over the rocks, it's really fast, that's the same as coarse coffee. So bigger number, or coarse coffee is a bigger number. So now I've gotten rid of my dead coffee, I'm going to try with my fresher coffee. So this is quite a common thing that problem people have at home, because they've bought fresh beans, they fill up the bean hopper too much, and they let it sit for a few days, and then your beans go stale, and then you won't have good coffee. Now let's see how this works. I can't even, look at me, 25 years experienced barista can't get the handle in the machine. Don't worry, very experienced baristas can make mistakes too. So this is why we've got to assess and go through. So I'm going to press OK. We've still got it on espresso. Now this shot should look a lot better. And then there's one last setting I want to talk to before we start answering your questions and before I do the fully auto machine. So you see it is actually taking longer for the coffee to come through. It's got a much nicer crema. And indeed, I can make this next shot even better, because I can tell you what the other problem that I have here is. But what you'll see is the crema's looking a lot thicker. It's taking a longer time to settle. And you can actually see the color on the top, if I can lean it, really making the camera guys work. It's very, very silky in color and much darker color. So some coffees are going to have thicker cremas than others. So we can also taste it. And that's a little bit rank, and I'll tell you why. Because temperature is the third thing that I want to change. Now, temperature should always be matched to the coffee that you're using. And in this instance, today, this temperature is a little too cold. So this is quite sour tasting. So I can see that I got the crema better. It's fresh coffee. I know all that's good. I know I've got my dose correctly. I know that my grind is correct. Now I need to change the temperature. So I'm actually going to take it up to number 3. To the hottest setting, and this is going to take that sourness away. So remember, number 1, change your dose. Number 2, assess the coffee. Have a look at how it's pouring. Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Then think about what you need to change on the grinder. And then once you've done that, think about temperature and match it to your actual coffee as well. And always remember to taste the coffee, because this is about matching it to your taste as well. So on the fully auto machine, we can change the same settings, but it's just done in a slightly different way. So in our screen here, this is the Prima Donna Sol as mentioned. Now, some of you won't have a touch screen, but you still have an area where you can adjust the grind in the back here. So if you take off the back lid, you'll have a little dial in there for the grind. If you have one of those machines, make sure that the grind is activated when you actually change it. So you need to press the button and then move the grinder so that it'll actually activate the change. For the screen machines, all we need to do is go down to adjust grind, press OK. You can go through the tour if you want to. This shows you what course, it's that the whole rocks and sand thing that I just went through, but I'm going to skip that and get straight to the numbers. And this is how we actually change the grind. So for this coffee, I've got it on 2. So before I make any more changes, let's just go out and make an espresso and make sure that we've actually got a good coffee or not. So you don't want to make changes before you've actually seen what it's like. So if I go into espresso on the screen, you'll see this aroma setting. Aroma is like our dose dial on the manual machine. This is actually going to make more or less coffee grind for the shot. So I always like to keep it on maximum aroma to 5. So I've got consistency through all my coffees. And then if I want it to be weaker or stronger, I put more or less coffee in the actual cup. So we've got the right aroma. We're going to press start and let's see how the coffee looks. And I like to let it pour onto the side of the cup so that you don't get bubbles. And then once we've done this, Craig's going to come back in and we'll answer your questions. And we'll also give you our tips on milk texturing. Don't forget, we will go through milk as well. So there's always a moment, because one of the biggest questions I get asked is, should I start counting from the moment I see the coffee or from when I press the button? And it's actually from when you press the button, because you are seeing, the coffee is starting to go through, the water's starting to go through the coffee before you see it come out of the spouts. But you'll see here, look at this beautiful crema, what we call the Guinness effect. So you've got this golden brown stuff just taking a very long time to settle. Look at that, it's so delicious. Now you can change temperature in the coffee machine as well. Sorry, I keep taking it away, making the camera guys follow me. Ooh, look at what I'm gonna do next. I like to keep them on their toes. So, perfect espresso. We'll try this one. See, that actually tastes better than that one because it's already the right temperature. So on all of your fully auto machines, whether you've got a screen or whether you have a sub menu, and don't forget, we have the DeLonghi how-to videos on our YouTube channel that tell you how to get into these settings if you don't know and you've lost your manual. But we can actually go down here to coffee temperature, press OK, and this changes the temperature. I've actually got it on medium, so I've got 2 more temperatures that I could go up if I wanted to make the coffee hotter as well. So I'm going to leave it on medium because this one is a darker roast, and we usually want to go like a lower temperature, and it's actually tasting pretty good to me right now. So Craig's just going to walk back in if you wonder who's walking behind me. And he's going to tell us a little bit about texturing milk. So we'll move back to Prestigio for this one, and then I'll show you a couple of tricks for getting the milk volumes right and choosing the right milk levels for the automatic. Because this is so much easier on this machine. I get the easy machine today.
Yeah, well, obviously it helps you with making milk. I think for a lot of people, the texturing milk process is what they find the most difficult. It's the most frustrating, right?
Yes.
And you start and you've got either no texture or you've got lots of bubbles and it doesn't look anything like the coffees that you get from the baristas when you go out to the cafes. I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks. It's one of those things where once you've worked it out, there's no more magic surprises. So
and it just clicks for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Once you've got it, you've got it. So if you are finding it difficult or if it's frustrating you, it's just getting familiar with it and understanding the little tips and tricks. So what I'm going to get Cheryl to do while I'm talking you through some of those techniques is I'm going to get her to make me a base of espresso so I can pour it in. So I'll tell you how to make some texture in a high quality texture, and then I will pour some latte out for you and show you how to pour those coffees. So let me just throw my little drawing that I did before back into shot here.
Yeah, Craig got all artistic on us.
I did. And
so
we're going to
cool.
come back to that in a second. There's my jug looking from the top, but let me show you here. So when you get your jug, you'll find that there are quite a few different sizes. And the reason for that is that you want to use the correct size milk jug for how much milk you need to make for how many cups you're making. So if you're making only 1 cup, this little 450, 600 ml jug is going to be great. Because what you want to do is you want to fill your jug up to roughly, I should tilt it there, to the bottom of the spout. Because if you don't fill it up enough, it's really difficult to have enough volume of milk in there to get that texture to form properly. And if you fill it up too high, you're going to end up with the jug overfilling with texture before you've got it up to temperature. So we're going to fill it halfway. Now I'm going to jump back to my picture because I want to talk through that. And while that picture's there, I'm going to pour some milk into the jug. So if you have a look at that picture there, you can see that I've got a dot here, and that represents our steam wand, and that's the location you want to put it. You want to put it into the top quadrant of the jug so that it's going to help you get the milk to spin in a whirlpool. So that's what those arrows are for, because you want that milk spinning around in a whirlpool, because that is going to help you add the texture to the milk. And the texture is air bubbles that happen when the steam pushes into the milk as it heats it from the end of that steam wand there. When it spins in a whirlpool, it allows the bigger bubbles that you're creating to spin back past the steam wand, and the steam pressure breaks them apart into smaller bubbles. The smaller the bubbles, ideally invisible, it makes your milk texture rich and creamy. And that makes for a really luxurious mouthfeel. And it also allows you to pour those great latte art patterns if you want to get into that process. But most importantly, it makes the drinking more pleasurable because of how the consistency is. When it's foamy and aerated, it ends up tasting quite hollow. You can't really taste that mixture of rich, creamy milk and coffee. And when it's really thin, it just tastes like you've poured milk from the jug into the coffee. It's not so desirable, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't taste that great.
And it's the same with your plant-based milks as well. Like, you should still be able to get a creamy flavour out of those for your lattes. It's just that they aren't going to texture as thick as your full cream milk because they've got different proteins in them. But it'll still be creamy when you get the milk right and not have big bubbles. So it's the same, essentially the same process, just different milk.
Well, most importantly there is you don't do anything different, but it is really valuable to make sure you realise you need your milk to come out of the fridge because you want it cold.
Oh, cold milk, always. Yep.
Definitely for those alternative milks because they're often in long life containers and you frequently will have them in your cupboard. Make sure you make them cold first because you have to get all of your texture into your alternative milk or your dairy milk before it gets to warm. If you try and put texture and air bubbles into the milk after it's warm, you just end up with exposed bubbles on the surface. So let's keep going. The next thing you want to do, so that just is a dot, right? But we want the steam wand to be coming in down the spout like that. And the reason for that is that allows us to have the steam wand at the right angle. If you try and have the steam wand in like that, often you'll pull the steam wand all the way to the top and it allows the ends of the tip to be exposed while it's spinning around. And then you get big air bubbles and it's not so good. So we're going to get going in a second, but I want to share with you my little steam hack. Because these domestic machines don't have as much pressure, they're a lot smaller machines than commercial machines. To get as much pressure as you can, what you want to do is you want to open the steam tap and just let it build up temperature. So I'm using this jug so that the water, the condensation doesn't go everywhere. You can use a cup. You can let it go into the drip tray, but it will make a little bit of water mess go around. So I'm going to send it into the jug. And you want to let it warm up and create that steam pressure until you hear it get to a constant sound. And you can hear that pressure building. And as soon as you've done that, we're going to quickly turn it off. We're going to add our milk jug. We're going to turn it back on.
Hey.
And then we're going to find that spot where it spins in a circle and we're going to let it start spinning before we start adding the air bubbles. And the sound of the air bubbles, Cheryl has a great word to describe that. She says it sounds like tearing paper. And so what you need to do is you need to slowly lower the jug to keep that sound going until it's warm. And you're going to slowly lower, you're going to keep it spinning in a circle, you're going to add that steam pressure to it. You might need to adjust it slightly. Because that milk volume is increasing as you're stretching the texture into it, it means you need to keep lowering that jug to achieve more texture. It's quite hard to see texture from the above, which is where you're looking as you texture it. So you need to use the side of the jug to help you. But you might just need to practice. Once it's warm, I don't want to add any more air, so I'm lifting the jug back up just a little bit, and I'm letting it spin and incorporate. And this hand that's holding the jug is going, oh, it's quite warm now. It's really hot. I don't want to touch it anymore. 1, 2, off. Don't forget, wipe the steam wand with a damp cloth. Give it a purge, because that's going to make sure it stays clean. And then what you want to do is you want to keep rolling that jug. So if we have a look here, you can see that the top of the milk, if we go from the top one, you can see there, oops, I'm rolling it and I've spilled it because I'm trying to look at the screen. So let's do that. If you keep it rolling, it's going to stay homogeneous, which means all combined. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit so I can pour. I've got a shot of coffee here, wonderfully prepared by Cheryl. I've spun that crema. I'm spinning the milk. I've tilted the cup a little bit so I've got a big puddle to pour into. And we're going to pour a thin stream with the jug around about 2 inches above the top. And then when it's time to finish, I'm going to bring that jug down nice and close. And we're going to get a white dot on top there. And I've overfilled the cup. It is very live. We're going to start again so I can show you a better pour.
This is why it's so frustrating, guys. I just want to add that you will have good and bad days for milk. And it's always about not forgetting the process, making sure that you stick to that process and think, what can you change for this next jug to get it even better? So what I want to tell you is when I first started as a barista, I would really clogged milk sounding. That means you're adding too much air. So get the right amount of air at the beginning. Then when the milk's lukewarm, it's telling you it doesn't want to stretch anymore. So this is the time not to have any sound. Make sure that the steam wand is just below, but you don't want to lose the spin. Always spinning, just like Craig was saying, to keep that homogeneous, lovely, joined froth with milk so that you have that creamy. And look at it now, like this is looking spectacular. So we've got this beautiful milk that we can pour into. And the next tip I want to give you is start simple. Don't go straight for a swan if you want to do latte art. Start with a heart or a dot. Just try and play with getting the right amount of thick, creamy milk in the cup for a heart or what have you. So Craig will show us now with the fresh milk.
Again. So you can see there now, I'm actually rotating it on the table. It helps you keep it in the jug. I'm not going to tip out quite as much this time. We've spun that. I'm moving a bit faster. Thin stream right in the center.
Oh, this looks good.
Try not to have it mixed together. Now it's time to get down nice and close.
Oh, look at that.
Here comes the pattern, really close. And then we can pour through.
Perfect
and then we end up with, oh, I've still spilled it.
Yeah, some days you just
I'm not
spill
having
the milk,
a good day
right?
with the cup.
Oh.
But there you can see there that we've got a much better pattern. I've controlled it better, and it's all related to the consistency of the texture that I've achieved. The texture allows you to pour the latte art, not the other way around. So you need to get the texture right. And what you can see here is you can see a ring of unbroken crema, and you can see a white pattern part of it. It could have been a white circle dot, it could have been an apple, it could have been a heart, it could have been a swan, it could have been a tulip, it could have been all of that stuff, right? A rosetta. And however, what you're after is that unbroken ring of crema and the white of the pattern, so that when you drink from it, it doesn't matter what side of the cup you drink from, you're going to get a mouthful of coffee, rich coffee flavour from the crema layer,
that creamy milk.
Sweet creamy milk. So it's always going to taste consistent in terms of strength. So hopefully that's a couple of pointers. I know that we have some questions that have come in.
Yeah, because Cam's walked into the room. He's going to be the voice that you hear behind the camera. And we've got some questions we want to answer ourselves because we love talking about coffee. So don't forget to send the questions in. Again, if we run out of time, we will answer the questions on the email, so you'll still get supported. And there's some other ways in a moment that I'll tell you about support as well.
And I'm going to drink that one because like you're saying, right?
Yeah.
You don't know if you've done a good job
until you taste
unless you taste it. So
That's
you've always got to taste what you make, even if it's wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because then you can figure out what you did wrong and change what you're doing. Because what's that definition of insanity, right? Keep doing the same thing over, expecting something different. No, you have to change things.
But more importantly, if you never taste it, you don't know if it's right or wrong.
Exactly, that's right. So we'll go with Cam's first question.
I'm hiding off camera, but I'm going to get these guys into line
Cam
here.
behind the cam, right?
Okay, first question. Our machine is the Letter Explorer. How can we improve the amount of crema extracted from it?
Oh, I'll take this one. Okay, so there's a number of ways, okay? But first, I can't stipulate hard enough that you must have fresh coffee beans. Now, I'm not talking about freshly opened package. I'm also talking about freshly roasted beans. So it's really important to try and buy coffee that has like a roast date on it, or maybe even go to your favorite cafe or your favorite roaster and make sure that you're getting beans that have been roasted, you know, in the last few weeks, not like a year ago, okay?
Do you want me to quickly say the science behind that?
Yes, please.
So very quickly, the science behind that is when you roast coffee, it creates and generates carbon dioxide during the process of the chemical changes from roasting. And as the coffee ages, it outgasses. And so it gets more and more stale. It happens really quickly, once you grind the coffee as well, which
Yeah.
is why all of these machines have grinders built in, so the coffee is ground
Fresh
on
for
demand, so
yeah.
it's ground as soon as you can. And so what the carbon dioxide does is it actually suspends the oils and the fines in the espresso to the top surface. So a large part of how thick your crema is whether the coffee is fresh or old, but also whether it's a light roast or a dark roast. Because
Yes.
the darker you roast it, the more carbon dioxide there is as well. So in terms of that, expect...
Sorry.
That's all right. Expect your crema layer to be thicker if it's a dark roast coffee,
Yes.
and thinner if it's a lighter roast coffee. Expect it to be really flat if it's stale. So here's one way that you can control the coffee. Remember, it's going to make noise in your microphone.
Exactly. That's right. I realized last time. So if you're going to put beans in the bean container on the top of the machine, try to only put enough in for what you're going to use at that moment. If you're going to have a busy day of lots of coffees, well, fine, keep it in there. But the next day you're going to come, it's not going to be the same fresh coffee that it was yesterday. I like to think that coffee beans are being attacked by the 4 elements. So that's heat, light, air, and humidity. And the more prevalent those 4 elements are, the faster your coffee is going to stale. But this vacuum sealed container, I'll hold it away from my microphone, you literally can de-vacuum it so that you can pop beans in here, pop the lid on top, and then just give it a few presses until that little white button, which way am I going? I'm always the opposite to the screen, goes down, okay? And now this is vacuum. Now we don't live in a vacuum sealed world where this will stay vacuumed forever because we need to breathe, right? So oxygen is around. So you just need to make sure that you pump this every day. You'll put a little bit in, enough for your coffees. And I know this sounds like we're harping on about fresh beans, but it's by far the most important thing, because if they're not fresh, you're going to be chasing the settings and then it's not going to work for you. And now the 2 other things you want to check are what we've already talked about today. So that's going into your, so for a Letter Explore, you will have the grind setting at the back. Now, if you've still got it on default 5, it probably hasn't been set to the beans that you're using. So what you want to do is press espresso. You'll come into here and you'll turn the actual grind 1 number. And usually if you don't have crema, it's because it's pouring too fast. So you'll see like a white or yellowy sort of color coming out. It'll look really ferocious, like pouring fast everywhere. That's that area to check. But then also check the aroma. So you must, I can't stipulate enough for fully autos, really put it on max aroma for every coffee. If you want a weaker shot, put less coffee in the cup. So you're going to go into the plus sign, because a Letter Explorer has the same screen as Sol, but smaller. So if you go into the plus sign, you'll see this aroma setting here. Make sure it's set to 5. And this makes sure that the most amount of coffee is being ground for your dose, so that you've got the correct dose. And this will allow for more of a crema as well. So once you've tried all those things, the other 3rd thing to check is temperature, because if you've got the temperature set wrong for your coffee, that can also destroy your crema. So just make sure, usually if it's a darker roast, you have a lower temperature, or if it's a lighter roast, you have a hotter temperature. Most coffees are around that medium roast mark. So you want to be sort of on max or high for temperature.
Yeah, so just to summarize that, obviously all of the parts that make a coffee are going to influence what it looks like, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so amount of dose, the grind setting, so the extraction speed, and the age of your coffee are all going to influence that crema layer. And all that crema layer is actually really useful for giving you the visual feedback about whether you've done the right thing.
Absolutely.
You can use scales, you can use timers, you use your eyes for sure, and then you obviously use your mouth to, And I think it is important, lastly, to say though, just because the crema has dissipated doesn't mean it won't taste good. So it's always worth tasting, because some coffees do lose their crema or not have as much. So hopefully that helps you in sorting out your crema layers.
Okay, I'm going to combine 2 questions here.
Oh,
okay,
double down.
I'm going to try to do this successfully. Okay, do you suggest to keep beans refrigerated, and is it better to buy the beans in smaller quantities, so like the 250 gram bags, or to buy into 1 kilo bags?
I feel like they've answered their question, but yeah, go for it.
I'm going to do it anyway, but yeah, you kind of have. The fridge isn't ideal because it's not cold enough for the humidity to not impact your coffee seeds. So it's likely that the humidity will form on the coffee seeds, won't taste great. However, you can freeze it. Coffee can be freezed to keep it, but if you want to freeze it, you realistically need to freeze it in doses.
Yes,
because
you measure
as
it out.
defrosts, it is going to get condensation on it, And if you then put it back in the freezer, not so good. You'll get freezer burn, not ideal. So you can freezer, or you can leave at room temperature. So I would recommend room temperature, cool, dry, dark spot.
Yeah, in one of those
an airtight
containers.
container, or in the bag if it has a Ziploc. And I always squeeze the air out of the Ziploc bags before I close it up. That will be the best way to keep your coffee fresh. And in terms of how much you buy, you should buy as much as you use. Normally I recommend in a week.
Yes.
So over the time of that week, you will be opening the bag, you'll be closing the bag. It will start to degrade. And so if you bought a kilo, but that takes you a month to go through it, you'll have a radical change from the beginning of the bag to the end of the bag. It won't taste so good by the end. But if you're using 500 grams a week, then perhaps you can look at either getting a 500 gram bag, or maybe you can open it once, store half of it,
Yes.
and then open that for the second week. They're the options. But I would always recommend get as little as you can get away with, so that you're always buying
have
fresh coffee.
Yeah, great ideas.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so we have a question here based around the La Specialista. Then La Specialista doesn't seem to hit the optimal zone. So the 12 o'clock position.
As in the dial?
As in the dial, that's correct.
Yes.
It only goes up 1 bar. How do we correct this so it does always hit the optimal zone?
Okay.
This is so good.
I feel like I can do it
You can
too.
do it. Yeah, you do
Okay,
it.
so this is a pressure gauge. So it's showing the resistance for the water trying to flow through the coffee in the handle as you extract your coffee. And I guess there's three things. There's one that's more difficult for you to control. The age of the coffee, so the amount of carbon dioxide, does influence how difficult it is for the water to flow through those coffee grinds. But the two primary things that you use to influence that part of the process is the grind setting and the dose. So what you need to do, if it's pouring too quickly, the first thing I would do is, like Cheryl said, check that you've got the dose right.
Yep.
So make sure it's filled the handle to the right level, or even give it a little bit of a nudge if you think it can fit more in there.
Yes.
And then after you've done that, you would go to the grind setting, and you would just keep chasing a finer setting, so the lower number, to slow down that shot.
Yeah.
By the time you get to 1, it really should be able to pretty much choke the coffee. So you'll find that it will actually head up towards the right-hand part of the dial, and you'll get into the red. It's okay not to be exactly 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it probably will fall back as it's extracting, because
Yes.
that pressure does fall away as the carbon dioxide is washed off the seeds. But it definitely is a really good visual indicator to help you. So hopefully that gets you heading towards the right direction.
And I just want to add one last thing, because sometimes you can lose coffee because you haven't cleaned your tamp or your grinder chute properly. So you just want to make sure that you either lift up this little arrow here and actually use the brush that was provided and give that a little clean once a week. Because if there is any build-up, like especially at the moment, it's been incredibly humid and coffee is very sticky. It looks dry, but it's actually quite sticky. So it's going to stick to the sides of the grinder chute. And if you're not cleaning it, it will restrict how much coffee is going to come through. But also if your tamp gets wet at all because you're putting in your handle wet, the basket wet, then it'll grab coffee off the top and you'll lose dose that way. So you might even be losing dose without realizing it. So just make sure that you pull the tamp down and you actually give it a little clean. I mean, you'll even see just from a few coffees that we're making there, you can see a little bit of coffee on my hands. So if you use a cloth to clean that, otherwise that dirtiness is going to pull the coffee off the top of your dose as well, and that could also change it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the one last thing is
Yep.
that first dose of the day probably has a little bit of stale coffee from the previous
just
time you grabbed.
like a gram or
So
something.
yeah, if you're really sensitive to that, you can grind off half a handle or so, reset it, and away you go. But definitely making sure you have the right grind setting, the right dose, and not stale coffee is going to help you bring that pressure gauge up and have a great extraction.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, I think this is time for the last question here. During the promotion, we received the signature blend beans, which our whole family loves. How do I find out what beans are actually used inside that blend? And also, they've got a fully automatic machine and they love the latte creamer system. They want to have a few tips on how they can make a hotter and thicker milk.
Ah, cool, too easy. So first question, if you head to the DeLonghi Coffee Lounge, not the physical one that's in Zetland, New South Wales, but the actual website that we have in Australia, all of the information about all of the coffees we sell are on there. So you will see the origins, the roast type, and everything for Signature Blend. So happy to hear that you're loving that blend. For the second part of the question, Here are my tips. Now, this goes across whether you want hot milk or just a hotter coffee in general. And this is kind of like what cafe dudes would do, cafe baristas, dudettes. Basically, you want to heat your cup up first. So if you just grab a glass from the cupboard, I mean, this one feels quite cold, especially because we're in air conditioning at the moment as well. If I pour coffee into that, it's going to steal up to about 20 degrees away from my coffee. So a cold cup will steal temperature, and it doesn't matter what setting you put on here. If you don't have hot coffee receiving the hot milk, it's going to feel like the milk temperature is a lot lower. But all of our fully auto machines are designed to make perfect temperature milk, just like Craig was doing on the manual machine, so that it should be hot for you. So number one, heat your cup up. It's very important. So whether you boil the kettle, whether you pop the little spout in for hot water, or if you've got Sol, it's actually got the central hot water here. So you can just go to the hot water menu in here and actually press hot water and it'll come through. Sorry, I've pressed the wrong... My fat fingers are always pressing the wrong button. So you press hot water basically, or even if you're just turning the machine on for the first part of the day, a bit of hot water will come out the machine because it's actually heating up the water lines in the machine as well. Now that's number one. Number two, if you've just come across from instant coffee especially, you're a person that loves a lot of water and a dash of milk in your coffee. Now espresso coffee is the reverso of that. So you've got a lot more milk and a lot less hot water. So you could potentially create a longer coffee in your cup. Now, I'm not talking about longer water pouring through the coffee because then you're going to get harsh flavors, but you might add a bit of hot water to the bottom of the cup, then pour your double shot espresso and then have the hot milk. And I find a lot of people love the temperature that way because you've come across from instant coffee, which is all hot water. So that's why you're noticing a difference in temperature. And then the third thing that you can check, there's two things. We've got this great clean function on all of our auto carafes. So you turn the dial to clean and it pumps out hot water and steam from the spout. Now this is usually used for after you've made a coffee. You'll see like discoloured water coming out because that's the milk. But if you've just taken your milk carafe from the fridge, this whole thing is freezing cold. So one of the things I love to do before making a coffee is actually to run that clean function, and then that water actually heats up the cup as well as the chute here, so that you're not having a freezing cold
Obviously
carafe.
throw that water away, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be like, because you just pulled it out of the fridge, it should be clean because you haven't used it.
I wouldn't necessarily say use the same cup you're going to make your coffee from.
Yeah,
I think
just pour it into
definitely
the
the hot water button is going to help you do that.
Exactly, so you have clean hot water.
Very quickly about the temperature of milk and espresso coffee, it's important to recognise that it isn't necessarily as hot as you like, because to make awesome tasting milk, 60 degrees is the temperature you go to.
Yeah.
And the food science, which can sound a little technical and nerdy, is that there's a reducing chemical reaction from the sugars and the amino acids in milk called the Maillard reaction. And that actually creates bitter flavours once you start going past 60 degrees. And that actually is normally why most coffees can taste not so good. It's because of the milk temperature.
Yeah.
So if you do love a really hot coffee, I'd recommend definitely try Cheryl's tips about some hot water to warm up the cup, making sure the steam spout has that cleaning purge through it so it is hot, so it's not stealing temperature. Add a little bit of extra hot water before you put the espresso on so that you've got more hot liquid in the cup. And then hopefully you get used to what it's like, because it will be a better tasting coffee. So if you can try and pull your temperature expectations back towards awesome tasting milk, you will get a great tasting coffee. However, I guess obviously the last part is if it's just not hot enough, you are going to need to add more hot water to achieve that, right? Because there's a set ceiling of temperature limit on the crema system, right? Which is 65 degrees?
Yes, exactly, because we don't want you to have burnt milk. So this is a big thing. So if this goes above 65, now with our electronic machines, it's electronically controlled milk, so you are going to see the regulation of that milk be even better. But yeah, all of them do 65. So it's not the machine that's not making milk hot enough. We just need to think about the recipe. So my dad is a classic extra hot drinker, like old school Mount Everest cappuccino with lots of froth. Like he's still in that mode. And he makes himself like a long coffee, which is one of the recipes in the fully auto machines. It does a double grind because he likes the strong. It gives you that extra hot water, and then he pours the milk over the top, and it's the perfect temperature for him. So if it can make my dad happy, that's pretty amazing.
Guys, I just want to say we did have a few more questions come in, but we've run out of time. So we will get back to everyone via email. So you'll have all your answers, everyone. But
so I also want to just say, before we just go and leave you all to making awesome coffee at home, there are a couple of other ways that you could get your questions answered as well. So don't worry, as Cam just said, we will answer the ones that are sitting in that event's email, but also we have our DeLonghi live demo team. So you can go onto our website. If you just Google search DeLonghi Australia live demo, you can actually book in a video call with somebody if you're in any parts of Australia or New Zealand, and that's a special time that you can book for the video call. But if you are actually in New South Wales, whether you come to visit or you come to Sydney, we have our physical coffee lounge that you can also book into. So when you go to that website, you've got 2 areas of booking for the Zoom call or for the physical DeLonghi coffee lounge, and you can actually book a one-on-one and have your specific questions answered. Also, don't forget our YouTube channel, DeLonghi How To. Go onto YouTube, search DeLonghi How To, and we have all of our machines have like a massive playlist of videos that show you how to set up, how to find those settings that I've been talking about.
Don't forget the clean, how to keep it clean.
Yes, how to clean the machine, because that dirty machine means bitter, foul flavors as well. So sometimes your coffees will taste bad because you haven't cleaned the machine. And don't forget, take the brewing unit out, turn the machine off. On your fully auto machines, there is a little brewing unit inside that's removable. This is a DeLonghi patent innovation that allows you to clean that so that you don't have those bitter flavors going in your coffee as well. And lastly, I just want to say thank you so very much for listening to us today. I hope you have some great tips and can enjoy excellent coffee on your DeLonghi machine.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Craig.
Oh, it's been fun.
Take care, guys.